Welcome back. A couple of quick tech headlines for you. Sprint and T-Mobile's merger talks dropped like a bad phone call. The nation's third and fourth largest wireless carriers announcing they will not merge after months of speculation. Analysts say calling off the deal makes for better consumer competition. And on the day Apple iPhone's 10 comes out, so does a website urging Apple CEO Tim Cook to seek the White House in 2020. Cook was on Hillary Clinton's shortlist of vice presidential candidates. The owner of the page is not known. We'll see about that.
All right, thank you, Pete. Republicans expected to roll out tax reform this week, but can they get it together to pass those cuts as soon as Christmas? Vice President Mike Pence, he's weighing in.
We want to go forward in a way that reflects President Trump's framework for tax reform. It's focused on the middle class. It's focused on job creators and businesses having more dollars to invest and create jobs. That's focused on simplification. And Democrats who will join us in that, we'll welcome them.
Here with more from her exclusive interview, Sunday Morning Futures host, Maria Bartiromo.
Good to see you guys.
All the exclusive interviees lately. Very great to have you.
No doubt.
Great to see you, Abs. Thanks so much.
Look, a big thing you talked to him about was tax reform. Can we get it done? Can they get it done by Christmas?
I think they can get it done. But, Abby, I cannot believe how hard it has been for the Republicans, to cut taxes. So a little funny thing happened as I was going through the tax plan this weekend. There's a 45.6% rate in there for income between $1.2 and $1.6 million. Really? 45.6%. That's going to be on the top earners for a portion of their income. And so I asked Vice President Pence about this. What is it about the Republicans that they completely abandon their principles of lowering taxes when they actually have to do it and push comes to shove? We're going to get into this. I'm all fired up about it. I would like to know why the top 10% of earners pay 70% of the tax, and we're cutting taxes on the people who do not pay taxes.
No, I mean,
how about cut taxes on the people that pay taxes?
Amen. Preach. Woo! I agree. But a lot of conservative media, like you, is fired up about this. There seems to be a hidden rate for high earners as a pay-for, effectively, to get it under the $1.5 trillion level so that they can get 51 votes. Do you think that will be a roadblock in this actually passing?
You know what I think, Pete? I think this is going to go away during committee. Okay, so next week, the following week, they're going to really get down and dirty. They're going to get their hands dirty in terms of what this tax plan looks like. And I cannot believe that a 45.6% rate is going to pass muster. But don't kid yourself. There are a lot of deficit hawks in the Senate. So we're still waiting on the Senate's plan. Another idiotic thing that could actually be in the Senate's plan is this phase-in of the 20% corporate rate. Yeah. Remember, President Trump said that his red line was 20% on the corporate rate. Well, the senators feel that maybe they'll just phase in that 20% and actually have it hit in 2022. Really? Who is going to invest and put new money to work to move the needle on economic growth if they're not going to get a 20% corporate rate until 2022? Yeah.
That's right.
So that's something that we're going to be watching as well. Also, real quick, I got to mention this huge story unfolding in Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince, who I interviewed 2 weeks ago, is jailing princes who do not agree with his vision. Overnight, he put Prince Al-Walid in prison. Incredible story. We're going to talk about that. I've got Steve Scalise coming up as well.
You've got a big show, Maria.
It's a big show.
Yeah, and it's starting in, just 11 minutes from now.
Yeah.
We cannot wait to see it, Maria. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Great interview.
Sunday Morning Futures.
That's right. Well, up next, we all blew bubbles as a kid. Now we're going to set them on fire. Find out how next. Of course we are.
Why not?
Yep.
Look at that.
Fire!
Good Sunday morning. This week, Republicans push ahead on tax reform, and with the North Korean crisis looming, President Trump continues his 12-day trip across Asia. That trip including key meetings with the leaders of South Korea, Japan, and China. Good morning, everyone. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Thanks for joining us. This is Sunday Morning Futures. Vice President Mike Pence out making the case for the GOP tax reform plan. I sat down with him for an exclusive interview. Does he think that the White House has the votes to pass a bill? And what is his take on the possibility of actually raising taxes on some Americans? Plus, we'll hear from the vice president about what he says about President Trump's big trip to Asia. Will the president be able to get more help from China in reining in North Korea? We're taking a closer look this morning. Then House Majority Whip Steve Scalise joining us for the first time since his return to Congress. We'll get his take on the tax reform bill. Also, I'll ask him about the breaking news overnight. Dozens of princes, high-ranking officials arrested in Saudi Arabia in an anti-corruption crackdown by the country's future king, included Saudi Prince Al Walid. We're looking ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. And in the next 2 weeks, we are expecting to get the Senate's version of the tax plan. Republicans are putting on the full court press this week after the House GOP put out the details for their tax reform plan. The measure described by some as the most sweeping changes to our tax system in decades. Vice President Mike Pence was in York, Pennsylvania yesterday to help sell the plan to small business. After his speech, he sat down with me for an exclusive interview. The vice president says that the measure is a great starting point, but there are going to be some changes before it actually gets to the president's desk for signage. Mr. Vice President, thanks so much for sitting down with me today.
You bet, Maria. Good to see you.
So you released, the House Republicans released a plan. I know you've been meeting with the Senate regularly. Are you expecting the Senate plan to be much different than what the House presented in terms of tax reform?
From early this year, we've been in continuous discussions with leaders in the House and the Senate to develop a framework for President Trump's vision for tax cuts and tax reform. And we fully anticipate that when the Senate bill comes forward, it'll reflect the president's framework. Now, there will be changes between the two and changes in the course of the legislative process. But we think the House bill is a great start. We look forward to the Senate bringing forward its tax cut bill. But the key here is that whatever is accomplished reflects the president's commitment to cutting taxes on working families, small businesses, family farms, having a middle class miracle in the midst of this, cutting taxes on businesses to 20%, cutting taxes on pass-throughs to 25%, and simplifying the tax code so that 9 out of 10 Americans will be able to file their taxes on a single piece of paper. The details of how we do all of that will continue to work through the legislative process, but President Trump's framework has been driving the development of this legislation from the outset, and it'll continue to drive our negotiations.
I want to ask you about that simplicity idea. But first, there is speculation that the Senate plan will include a phasing in of that 20% corporate rate, that corporations won't actually see 20% until 2022. Do you believe in that plan?
Well, President Trump has made it very clear that he wants to see taxes on traditional corporations, so-called C corporations, reduced to 20%. And he's taken a firm position.
Immediately or after 5 years?
Yeah, I think we believe it has to happen immediately. And we're going to drive hard. Look, this economy is starting to take off. We've seen the second consecutive quarter with 3% growth. We've seen the stock market setting records one day after another, nearly $5 trillion in wealth that's been created. But President Trump believes to have sustained growth in the days ahead, we've got to let the American people keep more of their hard-earned dollars. We've got to have the kind of tax cuts for middle-class Americans that the president's been driving for, but also we've got to lower taxes on American businesses. We've got to do it quickly, so businesses like those here in York, Pennsylvania, who we heard from, will be able to invest those dollars in wages, in hiring more employees, and in the kind of growth that will create even more jobs.
Right, and why would anybody invest if they're not getting a 20% rate for 5 years?
Well, that's right. And the president also is committed to immediate expensing rather than long-term depreciation on equipment. We really think we're at an enormously opportune moment in the life of this economy. Optimism is abounding all over the country. Unemployment's at a 17-year low. More Americans are working than ever before in our nation's history. And that's why President Trump and I believe that now is precisely the time to pass historic tax relief for individuals and businesses, and pass the kind of simplification of our tax code that'll save people millions of hours and billions of dollars in compliance.
You're right. Let me ask you, Mr. Vice President, can you explain this 40% marginal tax rate on earnings between $1.2 and $1.6 million?
That's a part of the House proposal that's been talked about, and I know the intention of House leadership there was to recapture some of the lower bracket savings that upper income Americans experience.
But that's a tax increase.
But, well, let me say, we think the House bill is a great start. But at the end of the day, the American people can be confident that President Trump is going to drive this legislation forward into what we expect to be a conference committee negotiation in the month of December. And we're going to make sure that we have tax relief across the board for working families and small businesses, family farmers, and ranchers. And we're going to make sure that that while it's not going to necessarily lower taxes on upper income Americans, we're going to make sure that it deals with upper income Americans in a fair and equitable way.
So you think that might be changed or fixed in committee then, 45.6%?
Well, I don't want to negotiate it now, but look, we really do believe the House of Representatives come forward with a good bill that's a great start, and it reflects the overall framework that President Trump has laid out. But when the Senate brings forward its legislation, and as we go into negotiations in the month of December, the President's just going to continue to drive. We want the tax relief here to benefit middle-class Americans. We want the tax relief to benefit businesses so that more jobs can be created and wages can rise. And we want to see the kind of simplification that'll also lift a tremendous burden off of the American people. The combination of that framework and making sure that companies can bring dollars in that are trapped overseas to create jobs here in Pennsylvania and all over America, those will be the driving forces, and then the details will all be part of the negotiations going forward.
I totally understand what you're saying, but some people are saying that the people who are actually paying the tax are not getting a tax cut. So if you look at the top 10% of earners, the top 10% pay right now more than 70% of the tax. So are you actually cutting taxes on people who don't pay tax? Shouldn't you be cutting taxes on the people who pay tax?
Well, I think the President very much wants to see this tax cut focused on middle class Americans, and we believe we're going to see a significant tax reduction for working families. When you take the standard deduction for couples and take that to $24,000, the first $24,000 in income is tax-free. Now, the House bill doesn't raise the rate. I know the math that you talk about, but it doesn't raise the rate from 39.6.
But 45.6 is raising the rate.
The President wants to see us lower the rates on working families, expanding the per-child tax credit, getting rid of death taxes once and for all. We think is going to benefit the ability to transfer businesses and family farms from one generation to the next. But the intention here is not to raise taxes, Maria. The intention here, though, is to focus the tax relief on the middle class, and we believe that the plan unveiled by the House, the plan that will soon be unveiled by the Senate, reflect that guiding principle of President Trump's framework for tax cuts, and we'll continue to drive forward on that.
With all of these things that we're talking about, whether it's that 45.6% rate or removing the deduction for state and local income tax, that hits middle-income families. And in the Northeast, you are seeing people see a higher tax rate as a result of eliminating that deduction. Is there any room for compromise? Even your own party is saying this does not reflect Republican principles of tax cutters.
Well, there's always room for compromise. But what the President is not going to compromise is his determination to see this Congress pass historic tax cuts and pass them this year. And the President is also absolutely committed, Maria, to make sure, as he says, that this is a middle-class miracle, that the majority of the tax relief benefits working families and working Americans and benefits businesses that can create jobs for working Americans. We know that the details will be worked out as this legislation goes forward, and I know there's been an attempt to address those issues already in the House unveiled legislation. But what the driving principle here will be is that while upper income Americans probably stay where they're at the end of the day, we want to see middle class Americans benefit, and we want to see businesses and job creators like those we heard from in Pennsylvania today be able to benefit and create jobs and make the kind of investments that will grow our economy.
In a moment, more of my exclusive interview with Vice President Mike Pence. I ask him if he personally agrees with a higher rate for the top earners, as I got to check out Air Force Two with the Vice President as well. Follow me on Twitter at Maria Bartiromo at Sunday Futures. Let us know what you would like to hear from Congressman Steve Scalise and Tom MacArthur. Coming up, we're looking ahead this morning on Sunday Morning Futures. We'll be right back with more Vice President Mike Pence.